So, welcome everyone to Near Far, wherever you are, Finding Your Voice with our special guest, Sarah Hurwitz. I'm LJ, the Northwest Community Manager here at Moishe House, and I'm coming to you from Oakland, California. If this is the first time you're joining one of our learning labs, welcome. We have one of these every week where we learn something that can help us support our communities right now and get the chance to talk to Moishe House residents, MHWOW hosts, and PLR facilitators from all over the world. So here's what our call today is going to look like. I'll be asking Sarah some questions, and she's going to give us lots of insight on finding our voice. Then you'll get the chance to ask Sarah your questions, and then we'll get into some small groups to talk about how we're using our voices to lead our communities right now. Then we'll come back together and share some final thoughts. So now I would like to introduce our special guest, Sarah Hurwitz. Sarah was the senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama. She was the head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama and chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton's '08 campaign. And she's also the author of an amazing book called Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism after finally choosing to look there. So I'm going to ask Sarah some questions, and if you have questions for Sarah, please post them in the chat and we'll circle back to them. So Sarah, my first question for you is, how did you get to be the head speechwriter for Michelle Obama, and what was it like to work for her?
Yes, it's great to be here. LJ, thank you for being in conversation with me. Thanks to Moishe House for hosting this. I'm a big fan of Moishe House, so I'm very excited to be with you. I actually got my start in politics as an intern in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office, and that was in college in the summer of '98. And the writers I worked for helped me get my first two jobs out of college, both of which were total failures. The second one was as a speechwriter for a U.S. senator, and his chief of staff literally sat me down after like 9 months and said, you would really do well to go to law school. I think that's a better career for you than speechwriting, which is not subtle. So I went to law school, and my third week of class, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey. But back then, he was just a classmate in law school who had previously written speeches for President Clinton. And the two of us started freelancing together. And we got jobs on General Wesley Clark's presidential primary campaign in 2003, and he lost. We got jobs on John Kerry's presidential campaign in '04, and he lost. I got a job as Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter, as LJ said, and you all know she too lost. So not looking great for me. 2 failed jobs, 3 losing campaigns. But then I got a job on the Obama campaign writing for then Senator Obama, and he won, which was exciting for me. And I met Mrs. Obama on that campaign when I helped her with her '08 Democratic Convention speech. And once he won, I went to the White House to write for him. But after a couple of years, I realized I actually just like writing for her better. And so in a career move that I think was surprising to many of my colleagues and probably also to President Obama, I moved from writing for him to being her head speechwriter. And it was awesome. She is a woman who she knows who she is. She always knows what she wants to say. And the process of writing a speech for her just involves sitting down with her and saying, like, what do you want to say? And she would dictate the most edgy, inspiring, beautiful language. She's just such a natural. And I would type it as fast as I could on my laptop because I really wanted to capture her words verbatim. Then that kind of download from her would really form the basis for a draft. And I would circulate it to dozens of my colleagues, lawyers, fact checkers, policy experts, just to make sure everything in it was accurate, because telling the truth and being accurate was just a huge priority for the Obamas. And, we were always really worried about that. And then once I had a draft that was complete, I would send it to her, and she would just edit and edit and edit, just back and forth, constantly editing. And then she would deliver it. So when people say to me like, oh, she always seems so authentic, it really isn't seems. Like, she really is authentic. The woman you see on TV was the woman I saw in the office, and it was a joy to work for her.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible experience. What a joy. So I was hoping that you could give us your top tips for powerful, persuasive, and effective communication, not just for writing speeches, but for everyday work and life. we build community here, and we're wondering how to do that, how to write powerful emails and social media posts, etc. And we were hoping to hear some tips for you on that.
Yeah, so I'm going to give three main tips. The first one is just say something true. Oftentimes when people are working on a communication, they think, okay, what will make me sound smart or funny, or what does this audience want to hear? And that's fine. Those are good questions, but they're not your first question. Your first question should really be, what is the deepest, most important, and most helpful truth that I can tell at this particular moment? And I would really make sure you have a clear answer to that question. Now, you may not be able to tell that truth. It may be an awkward truth or an uncomfortable truth or an edgy truth. That's okay. Your next step is then to figure out, okay, how do I tell this truth in a way that people can hear it? But you've got to figure out what is true first. I think when someone says something true, it's really bracing and it gives them credibility. I think about then Senator Obama's Democratic Convention speech in 2004, which he started by saying, let's face it, my presence on this stage tonight is pretty unlikely. And he then talked about his grandfather, who was a Kenyan goat herder. There is no political consultant on earth who in 2004 would have advised a candidate, like, you should really talk about your Kenyan goat herding father, right? But he just decided, like, this is my background, this is who I am. And he went up on stage and he said it. And in a way, he almost like called people on what they were thinking, which is, why is this African-American guy named Barack Hussein Obama up here? He was like, yeah, I know you're thinking that. I'm just going to lay it out there and I'm going to say what's true. And I think that gave him a lot of credibility to say something true. The second tip is talk like a human being. Even better, talk like yourself. You see so many speakers who are so dynamic and fun and wonderful just in normal conversation. Then they get behind a podium or they write an email or a memo and they become this sort of like awkward, very stilted, informal person. So you see people will be like, good morning, it is a great pleasure and a profound honor to be with you today. It's like, you've never walked into the office and greeted your colleagues by being like, good morning, it is a profound honor and pleasure. You don't do that. You walk in and you say, hey, it's great to, hey, how are you guys doing? So a better way to start is just like, hey, it's great to be here today. I'm so happy to be here. What would you normally say in your voice? You sometimes hear business people saying like, we need to catalyze our platform to leverage our results oriented, or like politicians will be like, hardworking American, middle-class family value. Like, no one has ever turned to their roommate and been like, dude, I think we should really catalyze our platform to leverage some movie tickets. Like, right? Like we don't talk like that. So if you wouldn't say something to one person, don't say it to many people. It actually doesn't get better. If you feel like you are reading a speech or kind of like typing on email that you think should sound a certain way and you're using all these big words and jargon that you wouldn't normally use, don't do it. Just talk in your own voice. And my final tip is show, don't tell, which is sort of a writing 101 tip, but no one really does it. And so let me tell you the difference. Telling is if I told you, my friend John is really neurotic, very exacting, really uptight, kind of OCD, kind of compulsive, really anxious. Version 2 is if I said, I left my friend John alone in my kitchen for 10 minutes, and when I returned, he had alphabetized my spice rack, and he was centering the magnets on my refrigerator with a ruler. If I call you up in the morning, will you remember that list of 5 adjectives, or will you remember those images? You'll probably remember the images. And a real life example of this is when Michelle Obama in her 2016 convention speech, she started that speech not by saying, when I first came to the White House, I was anxious and nervous and scared and worried and afraid. Instead, she said, on my daughter's first day of school, I watched them climb into those big black cars with those men with guns, and I saw their little faces pressed up against the window. And I asked myself, what have we done? Okay, she's scared and anxious and worried because she showed you. And so you can even just do this in an email. Maybe you want to write an email to your colleagues to thank them for really hard work they've done. You could say, I know you guys have worked hard and you're tired and stressed and it's been difficult and really challenging. Or you can say, I've seen the emails from you at 1 a.m, right? I've heard your family members kind of like, crying for you in the background on our Zoom calls, right? Like you can kind of say, like really paint a picture of what things look like. So showing, don't telling is also very important.
Thank you. Those were incredibly helpful tips. And I want to let everyone know that we're creating a guidebook with the learnings from these learning labs. So Mabel is taking notes, and so you'll have access to these tips. So I really appreciate that. And that image of Michelle Obama describing that moment with her children is so powerful. So that's something that I won't forget. You're right. So, my next question for you is, what are your top tips for editing? So, how do we polish and refine whatever kind of communication we're doing to make it as moving and as inspiring as possible?
Yeah, I almost think good editing is more important than good writing. My drafts of every speech I write, of every the book I've written, my drafts are terrible. Most people's drafts are just appalling, and they make them really good through a lot of editing. So just a few tips. Tip number one is just cut 10%. If it's a 100-word email, cut 10 words. If it's a 1,000-word memo, cut 100 words. Just do it. You can do it in red lines. You can always put it back. But doing this, it really forces you to hone in on the weakest parts, the parts that are repetitive, that aren't really compelling. So just cut 10%. That's a really kind of good thing to do. The second thing is when you're editing, it's really important to edit in a different format than you wrote. So if you wrote the thing on your computer, looking at the screen, just step away and look at it on your iPhone, or print it out and actually look at it on text, because when you continually look at something in the same format, your eyes kind of just dance over it. You can't really see what's not working. Or you can even just put it in a different font, different style, like a different size. That can be really helpful. It just kind of gets your brain out of those ruts of seeing the same thing over and over again. So I think making it look different is huge. And the third editing tip is that oftentimes when a communication or a piece of writing just isn't working, your problem is with structure, meaning it's actually just not in the right order. So oftentimes when I was writing speeches, I would just print them out and look at them, like look at the 5 pages, and I'd realize like, oh, this paragraph that I have at the end, that actually should be at the beginning. Or I'd realize like, oh, I'm saying the same thing on page 2 and page 4. Like I can delete one of those things. Or like, oh, I see, this thing should go before this thing. And you can actually reorder it, and then you'll realize that it flows better because it's actually in the right order. So sometimes structure can really be one of your big problems. So those are my 3 top editing tips.
Wow, thank you. So, how about delivery? If we're actually giving a speech or doing a presentation, you say that there's a difference in writing to be heard and writing to be read. And I was hoping you could tell us about that and give us a couple of tips on delivery as well.
Yeah, so writing to be heard versus writing to be read. Okay, I'm just going to stop now. I just said yeah, comma, so, dot, 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 writing to be heard versus writing to be read. That was just a couple of sentence fragments that didn't make grammatical sense, but I don't think anyone on this call was like, wow, that was some terrible grammar, and just that punctuation was way off. Those were fragments, right? We speak, our things that are meant to be spoken, they're often ungrammatical. They're often not in complete sentences. We speak in sentence fragments, and that's totally okay. So I think sometimes people, they will write something in the same way they would write it. They would write something to be read, and then when they read it out loud to be heard, it just feels stilted and kind of awkward. Writing to be heard is much more informal. It's much more colloquial. So you really have to, most of you are probably used to writing to being read, right? You're used to writing emails or memos or papers that people they read with their eyes. Transitioning to writing to be heard involves actually practicing. That's just the number one tip I can give for delivery, is just literally out loud, go through, if it's something that's meant to be spoken, go through, actually like practice it. And what you'll find if you're used to writing to be read is that it'll be kind of awkward and stilted and kind of formal, and you'll almost feel like I am giving a speech, or it'll just feel like it's not how you would normally talk, or you're kind of straining or uncomfortable. If that's the case, it's important to edit in real time. So I will often stand up and just practice stuff, and I'll like a sentence will seem stilted to me and I'll rewrite it. Or I'll be kind of going through and I'll be like, oh, this paragraph is so long and boring. I need to just tighten it. So I think it's really important to practice things out loud and real time edit them. And so what happens is like you'll stop a million times the first time you do it. Then I would go make the edits at my computer. And then the second time I run it through, maybe I'll stop, only a few times. I'll make more edits. I'll run through it again. And then, by the third or fourth time, you'll be running through it smoothly. So that kind of practice is key. I also think it's important to figure out the format that works right for you. Some people just do best with verbatim text in front of them that they can just read word for word. Some people do best trying to memorize it. I wouldn't advise that. It's very hard, but if that's your thing, you can try to do that. Some people do well with bullet points or notes or just a few words. So, sometimes when you're struggling with public speaking, it's because your text is kind of in the wrong format. So try different formats to see what is comfortable. And no matter what format you use, if you're putting it on pieces of computer paper, make sure that the bottom third of the page is blank. Only put the text on the top 2/3. And the reason for that is if you're standing up before people and you're kind of looking down at the bottom third to see, do you see what happens? Like my words get swallowed and I have to break eye contact with the audience. So it's kind of important to have the text you're looking at be a little higher up. So don't have your note cards sort of down like, near your stomach, have them kind of up in front of you so that you can kind of see them, keep your chin up, and remain in eye contact with the audience. Those are my delivery tips.
Wow. That is super helpful. I never would have thought about the blank space at the bottom, but you doing that demonstration makes total sense.
Right.
So thank you. Really insightful. Now I would love to transition to talking a little bit about your Jewish journey. So of all the things that you could have done after leaving the White House, why did you decide to write a book on Judaism?
You don't see that as the logical next step after 8 years in the White House? And I think it's very clear. No, I mean, it was I think a lot of people were very surprised by that, like almost including me. I mean, I grew up maybe like some of you on this call where Judaism for me was these two really dull services at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then a very boring Seder. And like that was the Judaism, right? Judaism was 3 uninspiring holidays. And by the time I had my bat mitzvah, it's like, okay, enough, right? There's nothing to see here. I'm a cultural Jew. I'm like vaguely proud to be Jewish. And I'm like, when there's anti-Semitism, I feel this like, yeah, I'm Jewish. We're going to fight our enemies, but I'm not going to do anything Jewish because it's just boring and obsolete and stale. Fast forward 25 years later, when at the age of 36, I broke up with a guy I was dating and I just had all this time on my hands. And so I randomly wound up hearing about an intro to Judaism class at the local JCC. And I really just signed up to fill time. Like it could have been a painting class or like a flower arranging class. I mean, really, I was not picky at this point. I was just feeling lonely, and nor was I on some deep spiritual journey. Just wanted to fill time. But I took that class and I was blown away by what I found. I think I found that Judaism had 4,000 years of wisdom on what it means to be human, on how to lead a meaningful and worthy life, how to be a really good person, and how to find profound spiritual connection. And I think if you're a Jew like me, whose only points of contact with Judaism were these 2 boring services and boring Seder, you don't necessarily think that Judaism has a lot to offer you. Like you think you kind of have to look elsewhere for meaning and spirituality and connection. So I was amazed. And so I took another intro class. I read hundreds of books. And what I found was that the books on Judaism, there were these great intro books that really cover the basics and the nuts and bolts and the how-to. And then there were these like super esoteric, academic, sophisticated books on like tiny areas of Jewish law, which like I did slog through them, but it wasn't fun and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. There was not, unfortunately, a lot that was for Jews like me, which was deep and substantive and edgy and really unearthed Judaism's profound insight, while also giving enough background that someone who doesn't know a lot about Judaism can follow along and can benefit. So I decided that that was the book that I wanted to write.
Thank you. So I would love to hear from you. We're living in a very scary moment, and I'm wondering what you think the most important insight Judaism can provide us at this time.
Yeah, I really think the core animating Jewish idea is this belief that we're all created in the image of God. And I don't care if you believe in God, don't believe in God, not relevant. What this idea of us all being created in the image of God, which is based on a verse from the Torah, Judaism's key holy text, what this means, as a rabbi named Yitz Greenberg beautifully articulates it, it means that every single one of us is infinitely worthy. Each of us is equal to everyone else, and we're all totally unique. There's no one else like us. And the truth is that not a single person on this call, including me, actually really believes that, right? We don't. It sounds obvious, but none of us actually fully believe that, because if we did, we would never walk by a person on the street who says, hey, can you help me? Can you spare $1? And just stop and say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, not today, and keep walking, or just kind of give the person $1 and say, okay, bye, and keep walking. We would never do that because what if that had been like a celebrity or a CEO on the street? Most of us would have stopped and been like, celebrity, this person's so famous. Like, yes, I can help you. Can I talk to you? Can I get your autograph? Like, we treat people differently based on their wealth, their fame, their beauty, their status, their likes, and retweets. We actually really don't think that everyone on the planet is infinitely worthy and totally equal to each other and truly unique. And so I think this is a really radical and countercultural insight, and one that just feels particularly important right now in a time where we are dealing with life or death decisions, where we're figuring out how do you value a human life. And I think it's really important to keep that core Jewish insight in mind.
Thank you. That is one of my favorite Jewish insights, the concept of we are all created in God's image. So thank you for that reminder. Um, so let's talk about Jewish spirituality. A lot of people are looking for answers and solace right now. And while we may have said prayers to God at some point, Jews don't really talk much about what we mean when we say God. And so I was wondering if you could share what that word means to you and what it could mean for those spiritual but not religious folks who are still looking for some spiritual connection right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, I think it's weird that we show up twice a year, or however often you show up, and we say all these prayers to God, and we just don't talk about what we mean. It's very weird, and I find it kind of disturbing. And the reality is, growing up like I did, I really just got the sense from our liturgy that the Jewish God is a man in the sky who controls everything and punishes you if you're bad and rewards you if you're good. I didn't believe that when I was 9 years old, and I still don't believe that now. And for a long time, I thought that meant that it was either my only choices were either that man in the sky God or atheism, or maybe like spiritual but not religious, whatever that means. But that's actually not true. Judaism has an incredibly complex and diverse array of conceptions of God. And that's because we as Jews, we have this fundamental humility to understand that when we talk about God, we're talking about something that's so big and vast and beyond the scope of our tiny human minds to precisely define or articulate. So there actually is no Jewish dogma or doctrine or definition of God, right? To do so, to say God is this and that, it's almost a form of idolatry. It's sort of shrinking this vast thing to the size of our tiny human minds. Instead, what you have in Judaism is centuries of different thinkers and theologians articulating a wildly diverse array of Jewish God conceptions. So you have Jewish mystics who say that everything is God. All of you are God, I'm God. The idea that there's any barrier between us, that's just an illusion. So when I pass by that person on the street who's in need of help, that person is God, right? That person is a manifestation of the divine. That'll certainly change how you interact with the world. There's Martin Buber, a Jewish thinker, who says that God is what arises in deep moments of human relation between two people, when they are being fully vulnerable to each other and just fully connecting with each other. What's arising between them in those moments is God. There's Mordecai Kaplan, who's a Jewish thinker, who says that God is the process by which we each become our highest and truest selves. Okay, none of these are a man in the sky, right? And there are so many more conceptions out there as well. And so I think learning about that, I was like, oh, wait a second. Maybe I actually do have a sense of the divine. That's interesting. Those moments do resonate and do move me, and I could see them being transcendent and divine. I also started going on week-long silent Jewish meditation retreats, which I was very skeptical at first, but what I discovered is in these days of praying and meditating, I saw my mind just getting really quiet. And I, much to my surprise, felt myself just getting in contact with something, I write about this in my book, and it's very hard to articulate, but something that just seemed very big and vast and undefinable, but also really intimate. And that felt to me in fleeting moments, just like this force of boundless love, of just being boundlessly loved and known. And, I don't think God is a being. I just don't. I think God is the animating source of all life. I think God is the process that makes for growth. I think that God is what arises in relation. But I relate to God as a being. I relate to God as a you, because that's what my mind needs to do in order to have relation. I think if you asked a tree, it probably has a different language for the divine, right? This is the human language that I think many of us use for the divine. And, is that like intellectually satisfactory? Could I defend that in a court of law? Probably not, but I think that's okay. I don't think the question is, can you defend this in a court of law, but rather, what does this do for you? What does having the spiritual connection do for you? Does it make you more kind, more generous, more loving, more peaceful? Is it something that's helpful for you? I think that's really the question about spirituality.
Thank you. That resonates with me, and I'm sure many other people on this call.
Mhm.
So, if we could talk about ethics now, many of us are trying to be a little bit kinder and figure out how to do the right thing in this challenging time. And you talk in your book about how you thought you were a good person, but studying Jewish ethics made you realize that you weren't a great person. And I was hoping you could tell us about that.
Sure. I think many of like kind of bought into the general secular ethic of like you do you as long as you don't hurt others. Or, the ethic of American law, which is don't physically assault people, don't steal their property, and don't infringe on their rights. But other than that, do what you want. And, that's fine as a bar for, public law. But as a way of living, that's a pretty low bar. I'm not hearing anything here about kindness, generosity, compassion, wisdom, maturity, caring, all of these things that I think are very much the preoccupation of Jewish law. So when I started studying Jewish law and ethics, I was like very blown away by how much higher this bar was than the one I held myself to. I think especially when it comes to speech. There's all this Jewish thinking around things like gossip and shaming people. And if you would ask me years ago, are you a big gossip or do you shame people? I would have been like, no, of course not. Studying the laws of gossip, I realized like, oh, I'm gossiping all the time. And in those arguments I'm having with people, whether it's online or in person, and I want to like get them and show them that I'm right, I do sometimes humiliate people. Like I do say things in a way that deliberately makes them look bad because I want to kind of have the last word or best them. And so that's been really sobering. Even a situation where like, let's say LJ and I are colleagues and we get into a fight one day, and I'm so mad at her. So I leave and I go home and I call a bunch of people and I say like, LJ is the worst. She's bad at her job. She's dishonest. She's mean. I just can't stand her. Get it off my chest. I feel so much better. Then the next day we come into work and we realize like, oh, it was all a misunderstanding. We make up. Problem is, I've just told a bunch of people some terrible stuff about her. And maybe those people told other people who told other people. And maybe, I don't know, a month from now, LJ applies for a job at a company where one of those people happens to work. And they're like, ooh, I remember hearing some bad stuff about that woman. No, 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 no. Let's hold here. I've heard some things about her. Right. In like one moment where I got something off my chest, I actually had a real impact on her life. So I think that's very sobering. I also think I've been really moved by the Jewish thinking around chesed, which means loving kindness. And it's not just an emotion. Like chesed is actually a kind of action that we take when we see people who are vulnerable or struggling. And it actually demands our physical presence, meaning that if someone is sick or in mourning after losing a loved one, like we don't just send flowers or a card. Judaism actually says like get yourself to their bedside, get yourself to that funeral, to that shiva, and actually spend time with the person, be there physically. Now, we cannot do that right now. Not safe, not acceptable. Please don't. But I do think that idea of a ministry of presence, which is what chaplains call it, that is something that we can continue in this time. Like that, the way that I think people have been really checking in on each other and just trying to be really present with each other, whether it's by Zoom or on the phone, and just really make sure that each other is okay. I think that we can still continue to kind of fulfill these obligations of chesed, even when we can't be physically present with each other. And I'll end with a story that I love about chesed, which is a story of this rabbi. We'll call him Rabbi A. He gets sick, and then Rabbi B comes, takes Rabbi A's hand, and heals him. Then Rabbi B gets sick, and Rabbi C comes and takes Rabbi B's hand and heals him. And the question is, wait a second, if Rabbi B could heal Rabbi A, why didn't Rabbi B just heal himself? Like, why did he need this third rabbi to show up and heal him? And the answer is that the prisoner cannot get himself out of prison. And I think that's a really profound story from 2,000 years ago about how we all get caught up in our own prisons of our own anxiety or sadness or fear or loneliness or confusion. And even if we're really great at helping other people out of their prisons, we just can't get out of our own prison. Right? We actually need someone to just show up and kind of break us out. And I think a lot of us are feeling like Rabbi B right now, where we're trying to support other people, but we really need support ourselves. And I think that ancient Jewish story really acknowledges this very modern moment that we're in.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And I think this is an opportunity for us to get a little introspective and think about our own ethics right now. So I have one more question for you, Sarah, before we open it up to the rest of the group here. I wanted to know, what about prayer? Some of us may be feeling the instinct to pray right now, but I know sometimes when I think of Jewish prayer, I think of services with lots of Hebrew in a packed synagogue. So I'm wondering how Jews can pray right now in this time of social distancing.
Yeah, I think we've kind of made the mistake in American Judaism of making Jews think that the only legitimate, authentic form of Jewish prayer is scripted communal prayer in a synagogue. And while that's certainly very important, that's not true. It's not the only form of prayer. I mean, if you open the Torah, which is Judaism's key holy document, those people, our ancestors in the Torah, when they wanted to talk to God, they didn't whip out a book awkwardly translated from a language they don't understand and read it. They were just like, hey, God, I want to talk to you right now, right? So this unscripted personal prayer is an individual prayer that's a very authentically Jewish practice. And that's something that we can do. You can do it out loud. You can do it in your head. Even if you're like, don't really believe in any kind of God, that's okay. You can just be like, all right, I don't believe in you, but here's some things I'm thinking. Totally fine, right? Doesn't matter. You don't have to totally know what's happening. We also have a really beautiful blessings practice in Judaism, all of these ancient blessings for various moments in the day where we stop and we feel gratitude for something, whether it's the food we eat, whether it's something beautiful that we see outside our window, whether it's even just, there's actually a blessing that you say after you go to the bathroom, which celebrates the workings of your body, which is like a little gross, but also very moving to be kind of constantly expressing gratitude for your health. So blessings practices are ways that you can kind of pray. And I also think there is a deeply Jewish practice of meditation that stretches back thousands of years. And there's a whole Jewish meditation community, which I love and I'm part of. There's the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, there's Or Halev, and those folks have online classes and meditations and retreats. So those are great things to explore as well.
Wow, thank you. You just made prayer feel so much more accessible. So
I'm
really
glad.
appreciate. And Moishe House also has a Jewish meditation retreat that does have some silent time. Obviously, it's not happening now in this time of social distancing, but look out, everyone, in 2021. We should be back with Jewish meditation retreats.
And I will tell you, Or Halev is actually hosting online like silent meditation retreats, week-long ones. I'm actually doing one in May. So
Wow.
check it out if that's something you're interested in.
Great. Thank you. So I wanted to give other people on the call a chance to ask Sarah some questions. I haven't seen any come through in the chat, but okay, we have one from Josh in Carlsbad. He says, Sarah, thank you so much for speaking to us today. This is the third time I've heard you speak since last fall. I'm
That's a
curious.
lot, my friends.
Yes, so awesome. I'm curious, what has been the most interesting question you've received on your book tour, and what was your answer to it?
It's so funny you're asking this today because last night somebody asked me whether kind of transitioning from this very political journey to more of a spiritual journey has been hard because has it like alienated me from friends from my former life? Like, do I feel like we're just on different wavelengths almost? And no one has ever asked me that before, but I thought it was a super astute question because like the answer is like, yes, a little bit. I think as I've become more interested in spiritual things and religious things and soul kind of things, I do feel like I tend to have more in common with a new community of friends that I've developed. And, some of the kind of political chit chat of my old community, just not quite as moving to me. So I do feel like a little bit of that distance. But I also think that's true of any journey that you take in life, of anything that you pursue where you're kind of growing and changing, like you do end up, leaving to some extent, just changing your relationship to the people in your life. So I thought that was a super interesting question.
Thank you. So Faustine in Paris is curious to hear if you have any next projects, Jewish and or professional.
Great. Wait, Faustine, did we meet at a conference years ago in Europe? Are you the same Faustine?
Yes, that's me.
Yes, so
so
nice
much.
to see you again. I remember you. You're awesome. Thank you for coming today. Yeah, I've started working on a proposal for a next book. I really like to write a book about God and Jewish spirituality. I think it's like, I tend to write the books I wish I had, and I just really wish there were a substantive and powerful Jewish book about God that was also accessible. And so I have these like piles of books about God, which I am like really trying to slog through, but wow, it's dense, very dense. So just trying to slog through and translate it. And every so often I take a break and read a Christian book about God, and it's like so moving and clear and accessible. And I just think like, I think we can do better with this. So that's what I'm trying to do, but it's very hard. And we'll see. We'll see if I get a book deal. We'll see if there's interest in it. I'm also starting a Facebook live show called What's Up with God. It starts next Wednesday, and every week I'm just going to interview Wednesday at 8 p.m. on Jewish Live. I'm going to interview a different sort of rabbi, scholar, thinker who has a unique perspective on the divine. My first one is someone who's really into mysticism and meditation. My second guest is someone who's into the divine feminine. My third guest is someone who talks a lot about God as experienced in nature. So just kind of we'll see how it goes. Never done anything like that before. Could be great, could be a disaster. We'll see.
Doesn't sound like it's going to be a disaster. That sounds really cool. And this is just a time of experimentation. So I think that's going to be awesome.
Thanks.
Okay, yay. We have a couple more questions coming through the chat. Let's see. How do you engage others in keeping with Jewish ethics, particularly about gossip/humiliation? This is coming from Bevan in Seattle.
Yeah, it's such a great question, because sometimes that's almost intention, right? Like if someone is sharing gossip, you don't want to humiliate them by being like, you're gossiping, you're a bad person, right? It's like, that's not ideal. And I think the answer is it's kind of tough sometimes. I would say I guess I still mess this up like 100 times a day, and I used to mess it up 150 times a day. So I don't think this is about being perfect or about doing it always right or being, this total model of exemplary behavior. Instead, what I think this is about is more just like having this voice in your head where when you're about to send that email or you're about to make that nasty remark, you're like, nah, maybe not this time, right? I still go ahead and make the remark way too often, but just having that in my head saying, Sarah, that could really hurt that person or humiliate them. I think that's helpful. And I think when there are people who are kind of like who are gossiping, I'll sometimes just kind of, instead of being like, that's gossip, you're bad, I'll just kind of like change the subject or just kind of try to take it in a different direction. And I think with shaming, I will just sometimes, like when I'm writing an email, I cannot tell you the number of times I've written an email where I'm just like taking someone down, or I'm like, I've got you, I'm going to beat you. And then I thought, actually, I really don't need to do this. I can just, instead of assuming that they are being rude or disrespectful, why don't I just assume for now that I don't know their intention? Might be rude, might not be, and I'm just going to respond respectfully and see what happens. So that's how I've tried to do it, but I certainly nowhere near perfect, and yeah, long way to go.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. This one is from Flor and Juan in Buenos Aires. And they say, Sarah, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Our question is, what's your opinion on the inclusive language on public speeches or writing, and if you implement it?
And do you mean like language that's gender inclusive? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have the same question for Flor and Juan.
Yes.
Ahí está el micrófono abierto.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I like it actually a lot. I tend to use the pronoun they, even for the singular in public speaking, because it actually doesn't sound that ungrammatical when you're speaking. And it just, he or she is it's clunky. And it's also just leaving out people whose gender identities don't fit in he or she. And I actually think it's just as easy to say they. I think it's simpler. I think it's cleaner. So I think it's such a small thing to do for people, right? I don't think people are asking for some like radical societal innovation here. I think they're just asking for a very small change in speaking that can make a big difference. So like, to me, it seems like such a small thing to do. So I'm happy to do it. And when people say like, well, that's not correct, it's like, well, I don't know. We used to say thee and thou instead of you. And it's like, okay, but now we say you. Language changes, right? Language, speech evolves, and I'm fine with that. So yeah, I'm a big fan. And it's a really interesting question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. We're gonna get into some breakout groups now. Well, we're gonna talk about what Jewish values are gonna guide how we use our voices during this pandemic. And then you'll create a mission statement for how you're gonna show up for your community and for yourself right now. So we'll get into groups and we will see you back in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for participating. I hope you have some clear intentions for what you're taking from this call back to your communities. So if you want to hear more from Sarah, we don't have time to share out our mission statements today, but if you're proud of yours, please drop it in the chat for everyone to see. But I wanted to invite you all to check out Sarah's book. If you've been interested in what she has to say today, we've just scratched the surface and there's so much more wisdom here that she has for us. So encourage you to check it out. And I just want to thank Sarah so much one more time for joining us today and for sharing her story. So really appreciate it. Feel free to show her some love in the chat, like throw some hands up, claps on mute, whatever you want to do. So thank you, Sarah. And if you are here for Expedition Nye, the world's largest virtual color war, take a screenshot of this slide for your submission, and you can still join the fun if you haven't already. And you can check out moishehouse.org/the living room for our calendar of different play shops, since there's no work at camp, get it? As well as the virtual Moishe House programs that are happening around the world. And next Thursday, please join us again for our next session of Near Far Wherever You Are. It's called Community Starts With You, and this is going to be an exploration of self-care with psychologist Annette Diner, and she is going to talk to us about some tips and tricks on how to listen to what you need and prioritize your well-being right now. So please join us for that. And that is all we have for you today. So if you have any feedback that you want to share about this session, if you have lingering questions, or if you have ideas for another learning lab, please email aliza@moishehouse.org. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
And can I just say, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you want, there are discussion guides on my website, just at sarahhurwitz.net. So if you want to like talk about my book with roommates or friends, or just even think about it yourself, like it's really meant to be read with others in communities. So just wanted to put in that plug. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for mentioning it now. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.